Women protesters stripped naked, photographed, beaten, shocked with electricity, and forced to endure these so-called virginity checks. I'm talking about Egypt during the height of the civil uprising that flipped the country upside down this past spring. Folks, those are just a few of the items Amnesty International said police officers and troops did to these women arrested for demonstrating after Hosni Mubarak stepped down as Egypt's president. Now, charges are one thing, but CNN has confirmed from an Egyptian general that some of those things did in fact happen. And I've invited Egyptian journalist and columnist Mona Eltahawy to help us understand what's happening here, why the military is defending itself on charges that these troops did these horrific things. Mona, do me a favor, hang in with me for just a second, because I do want to play a portion of a report straight from my colleague Ivan Watson. You're going to hear what Egyptian troops are charged with doing from their alleged victims, and then we'll talk about it afterward. Watch this with me.
In Tahrir Square, the epicenter of Egypt's revolution, Rami Issam raised his voice in protest during 18 historic days and nights, which brought down a despot and left many Egyptians full of hope.
Everyone now can sing anything he wants without being afraid.
But look what happened to Issam barely a month later. Beaten, battered, and scarred after Egyptian soldiers detained him.
The torture took 4 hours. They removed my clothes. They used sticks, metal rods, wires, ropes, hoses, whips. There was also electrocution. There was an officer who would purposely jump in the air and land on my face with his legs.
Issam was one of scores of male protesters detained during this crackdown by security forces in Tahrir Square on March 9th. Troops also arrested at least 17 women who were kept for days at a military detainment center. Amnesty International says these, quote, women protesters were beaten, given electric shocks, subjected to strip searches while being photographed by male soldiers, then forced to submit to virginity tests. One of these women was this 20-year-old hairdresser named Salwa Hosseini.
They made us sign statements declaring whether or not we are virgins.
She says she submitted to the test under threat of electrocution.
During the test, no one was standing except for a woman and a male doctor. 6 soldiers were standing behind us and watching the backside of the bed. I think they were there to be witnesses.
I encourage you to go to CNN.com to watch Ivan's entire report. Mona Eltahawy, journalist and columnist. Mona, do me a favor. You know, I want you to take off your journalistic hat for just a moment. I want to speak to you as an Egyptian, as a female. What is your visceral reaction to these charges?
I'm absolutely disgusted, Brooke. I'm first of all relieved that some general in the army has finally admitted to this, but ironically and horrifically, the way that he has justified this general who's off the record, confirmed to your journalist that these so-called virginity tests happened, justified them by saying, shockingly, these were not women like your daughters or mine. So he's insinuating that these were quote-unquote bad women and therefore deserved these sexual assaults, which they call virginity testing. So I'm absolutely horrified, but it's another reminder that although more than 800 Egyptians died and thousands were injured during our revolution to get rid of Hosni Mubarak, we've replaced one Hosni Mubarak with a Supreme Council of Hosni Mubaraks that goes by the name of the Supreme Military Council.
We'll get to that in a moment here because it's an excellent point you make, but I just want to make sure, I mean, there is no, loss in translation here. We're talking virginity check. Ivan mentioned in the piece. I mean, this is physically checking these women, correct?
It is, and this is part of, by way of explaining why these so-called virginity tests happened, Egypt is a conservative country, and like many other conservative areas of the world, like Latin America, like Turkey, like other places, a great deal of value is placed on a woman's virginity. And so in Egypt, for example, it's shockingly familiar to so many people to hear that in the much more conservative rural areas, a traditional midwife will perform this so-called virginity test to ensure that the bride-to-be is a virgin. education
I mean,
in the more
honor,
affluent urban areas.
Honor, dignity.
Yes, it signifies honor that, you know, our daughter is a good girl. She remained a virgin until she got married. But of course here, I mean, the ultimate unfairness, of course, is that no one goes around checking boys or men for their virginity. So this is a burden that is solely placed on women's shoulders.
The general, he did speak directly to us here at CNN. He said the virginity checks were done so that the women wouldn't later claim that they had been raped by Egyptian authorities. I want to read what he said. Quote, none of them were virgins. So what did these troops, what did they think they were accomplishing by doing this, allegedly? Or actually, no, not allegedly, because they said they were doing it.
Exactly. What they're doing is a direct continuation of what the Mubarak regime was doing. This is the state sexually assaulting women in a conservative society to shame those women and to tell those women, you belong at home, not on the streets demonstrating against us. In 2005, Mubarak's regime, his security forces, sexually assaulted women, journalists and activists to send that message. And after Mubarak was forced to step down, the Supreme Military Council did the same in the form of army soldiers. So this is a continuation of the state. When the state violates women sexually, it essentially says women are fair game. It says that these women are bad women and they are fair game. And it's essentially shaming Egyptian women because it wants to play on this high value placed on women's virginity. So it wants people to say, these were bad women, but these are revolutionaries, these are activists. So I think that they have gambled on the wrong side, and I think there will be a great deal of outrage in Egypt against this further violation that goes in line with military trials for civilians, torture, and a whole host of horrors that the military is committing against Egyptians.
And just to end on a point you made earlier, and I just want to reiterate it, it is the military council in charge here. They're in charge of this democratic transition to a new Egypt. Excellent point, Mona Eltahawy. Thank you very, very much. Back here in the United States, which Republican will